You guys in Minnesota are such a pain. Every other state is fine. What's your problem? This week, the state head of the prison system, the head of the Department of Corrections, Paul Schnell, has started more aggressively pushing back and presenting receipts. And today, Paul Schnell got something that I don't think I've ever heard of. And he got one of the ICE agents and a member of the federal government to say, well, actually, Minnesota is respecting what we want.
Yeah, I clarified that yesterday by saying that the Department of Corrections for the state of Minnesota does cooperate. They hand people over at the end of their sentence, and we take them into custody. The numbers that we put out aren't, when I say the state of Minnesota, I'm not talking about just the Department of Corrections. I'm talking throughout the state, counties, any municipalities that may be holding people.
Paul Schnell is the commissioner of the Department of Corrections. He's with us on the John Schuster Coldwell Banker hotline. Do you feel vindicated at all, Paul?
I wouldn't say vindicated. I think, there still is a lot of misinformation. I'm speaking in terms of on behalf of the sheriffs across the state. And then certainly I think we're also seeing issues around, the information that's being put out about the worst of the worst that they are suggesting were swept up. And we, even as of today, there was some information came out of Washington around people that were swept up during Operation Metro Surge that, in fact, had been turned over, or in this particular case, a person that actually remains in custody. So I think, these are some of the challenges we're working through, but we felt it was just important for people to have accurate information.
Talk to me a little bit about that conversation about the worst of the worst, because we talked with the Star Tribune reporter who yesterday kind of went through and analyzed as many of these names as they could find records for. And they found that, yes, some of these are bad folks, but it was really difficult to tell which of these people were actually swept up here in Minneapolis during the surge we've been seeing, and how many were people that maybe your prisons that the Department of Corrections actually handed over. Do you have any sense for how many of these that they are claiming like, oh, well, this is why we're here, were actually people that just got released in the normal process of how you guys do things at the prisons?
Well, I mean, what we found is that if they were subject to an ICE detainer, ICE was notified, and ICE made a decision about whether to take them into custody or not. We also do know that there were people that we had released directly to ICE and facilitated that custody transfer, and they went into the ICE custody and were held for a period of time, and then ICE released them back into the community. And we had to assume then correctional supervision of them for the remainder of their sentence. So that's not something that we're involved in. But we, too, had a really difficult time trying to track the information. Some of the names on the list that we were supposedly responsible for, or Minnesota was supposedly responsible for, we could not even find any type of criminal records or involvements in Minnesota. So where some of this information is coming from, we wish, we could have a clearer understanding.
Paul Schnell is with us. He is the head of the Department of Corrections. For our listeners who maybe didn't follow all of this back and forth between your agency and the feds, the basic argument the feds have been making, and now they're directing it to counties, the basic argument is that, look, the argument and the reality maybe are two different things, right? That's sort of what you've been trying to draw attention to.
Exactly. I think, they were saying, look, that the state and just in general has not cooperated. Therefore, if, we need to get these dangerous people off the streets, and that's why we are doing this surge. The reality is that, some of the people that get sent to prison are the people who I think, do reflect. They're convicted of crimes, in some cases very serious crimes. And that's the reason why we fully have historically and have historically cooperated with ICE. We think that that's important from a public safety standpoint. At the same time, I think it has been somewhat used as a guise to come in and engage in far more broad and sweeping actions that have nothing to do with this focus on the worst of the worst criminal element that is roving Minnesota's streets.
So one of the examples that I think a lot of our listeners will know about is that really horrifying image of an older man in what appear to be boxer shorts, no shirt, and a blanket being kind of pulled out of his house. And one of the things that drives me nuts is it is so hard to know who to believe because we're in a situation where the stories keep changing. And as facts come out, then the story changes again. But in this case of Chong Lee Tao, the feds said, they detained him. He's a citizen. He's here legally. They returned him home. But they said it was his fault because he was harboring for a while he was living with a sex offender in this house that they were trying to seek. And then this guy gets blasted like, oh, well, I don't have much sympathy for him because he was living with a sex offender. Well, it turned out that this sex offender that the feds supposedly wanted was where?
In one of our prisons, and will remain there until 2027. At which time they will be turned over to ICE. And so that's one of the frustrating things. And this information is still being put out there.
Right.
And it's hard to understand.
He's in Faribault. The guy they want is locked up in Faribault, which any of us could do a record search and find that information.
See his picture. Exactly.
I mean, this is what's frustrating where you say and I ask you, I mean, you live here, you have family here. You don't want people who are in this country illegally or shouldn't be here, and they have a violent background. You're in favor of ICE doing their job and getting those folks back to the country they belong in, right?
100%. And that's why we have the policy and the practice that we do. And here's the other thing, Jason, I would say is that when you talk about the actual staff who are doing this work, I'm talking about DOC staff and even the local ICE staff, there is a longstanding, collaborative approach to management of this. And yet I think the people whose voice are being brought into this are speaking at a different level, maybe at the political level and so forth. And so I just think it's really important for Minnesotans to know that at the operational level, this stuff is working. But I think what's happened now is the rhetoric is leaping up kind of and kind of covering some of the realities of what's actually happening. And that's unfortunate for everyone, and especially for people who may feel unsettled with the belief that there is not cooperation, when in fact there is.
Paul Schnell is the head of the Department of Corrections, in charge of the prison system, which has been accused of not cooperating. Now, some of these people on this list of the worst that were swept up as part of this operation, you have found that some of these people were released to ICE as far back as the 1990s, right?
Correct. Yes. Absolutely.
So they're just, I get it. Like, they're looking for the political win. They're looking for the justification of some of these tactics that we've seen on video and we've seen in our neighborhoods. That's part of it, right?
Without a doubt. And I think, that's the unfortunate part of this. I think, what we all want there to be sound, solid immigration enforcement and getting bad actors out of our communities. But I think it's also important that we all understand the realities of what's happening, and the misinformation, creates a level of concern and fear and misunderstanding that doesn't serve, certainly isn't serving anyone, much less our communities and people who are being impacted.
Do you look at the practices of the county jails where they don't? There are many differences between a county jail. You used to work for St. Paul Police Department. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
At the state level, the date of release is very predictable. When someone's getting out of state prison. At
Correct.
The county level, it's not as predictable. And when you call ICE, as most of our county jails notify ICE if there's a request, right? But they can't always get there, and it's sometimes like, oh, this person's going to be released in 3 hours or something. It's not always a practical situation. Are there ways that you look at the county system and think, there might be ways that they could work better with federal authorities?
I think one of the things that's really important to know is that I believe that our sheriffs across the state are doing everything they can to cooperate for the most part. And yet there are simple legal realities that if a person posts bail or if a judge issues a release on their personal recognizance, or if a prosecutor elects not to bring a charge at this time, those people have to be released. They cannot be held, or the county, the sheriff, the jail is subject to civil liability. And I think that's really important for people to know. And as being committed to the rule of law, they have to do that.
Right.
And so I just think it's really important to know that I think for the most part, this is just one of the challenges, and maybe there are some collaboration things, and depending upon where ICE has, staff housed, that might be able to be part of the solution, but it's never going to be perfect. But the bottom line is, just like with the state prisons, if they cannot get there on the date of release, they have to be released because that is state law. And we would just subject Minnesota and taxpayers to liability.
Yeah. I mean, the law could be changed, but that is the law right now. That is the law right now.
That is the law right now. And I think it also, it is a fundamental due process reality that, when.
It's like you're being arrested twice if you hold someone after the release date.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah. It's a major issue with the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution. It's very, very difficult to get around it. Paul Schnell, we appreciate the time, and we appreciate all of those Department of Corrections officers all over Minnesota who are doing their best to keep all of us safe and keep the prisoners safe as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you.